Welcome back, everyone. We know that was a brief break, but we welcome you joining our 10 o'clock session for the California Association for the Gifted Summer Institute. My name is Julia Nyberg, and I serve as the Executive Director for the California Association for the Gifted.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Nereida Garcia Prado, and I serve as an executive board member and chair of the Equitable Access Committee for the California Association for the Gifted.
If you'd like to share how you are transferring these ideas into practice, don't hesitate to use the chat. You can also use the Q&A pod to ask questions during this session.
And also join CAG by becoming a member today as an individual or as a school site. Sign up at www.cagifted.org by clicking on membership. This session will last from 10 to 10:50. The next session will begin at 11 using the same link you used to log into this session.
I have the distinct honor of introducing Dr. Jennifer Krogh. Dr. Jennifer Krogh currently works at USC Rossier School of Education as an academic advisor for doctoral students. And she spent several years as an adjunct professor for their undergraduate and graduate programs, including teaching courses for the University Certificate in Gifted Education. In addition to her work at USC, Jenny is an educational consultant for schools and districts in Orange County and Los Angeles, with the goal of supporting teachers in their efforts to present differentiated learning experiences to students that prompt critical and creative thinking, as well as self-reflection. Welcome, Dr. Krogh.
Thank you, Julia. All right, I'm so happy to be here today. Welcome, everyone, and good morning. Moving into the afternoon. So I'm able to just share my screen here, right? There we go. All right, how's that, Julia?
Yes, we have liftoff.
Okay, excellent. We're in business, everyone. All right, I am excited to be chatting with you today about how to really facilitate inquiry-based learning strategy and foster that curiosity in the classroom. And we're also going to talk about the skills inherent within this strategy that students will practice as they're engaging in what's known as Socratic seminar. All right, so first off, I will be using the chat today, so I'll be asking you to respond in the chat to we're going to have a discussion via the chat as much as we can. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to start off by going through a little thinking exercise. And you see these 16 different items on the slide in front of you. And what I'd like you to do is think about how some of these ideas are similar to each other and how some of the ideas are different from each other. And then how would you categorize them? So just go through maybe on a scratch piece of paper or notebook in front of you and jot down ideas on how you would categorize the items on this chart. And I do want to say I will be sharing everything I talk about with Julia today after the presentation so that you will have access to these resources. All right, I'm going to pause us there. Obviously, if we were doing this in the classroom, we'd spend a little bit more time with it, but I want to make sure that we're able to discuss this strategy fully. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing in the chat, where are some connections you made in terms of grouping? What did you categorize or what items did you put in the same group? So if someone could, or some of you could just share in the chat. You could just list a few that you saw similarities to that you put or placed in the same group. Okay, thank you, Vanessa. So you're already looking at positive versus negative as labels, I'm assuming, for the group. What else? What goes together here? What do you think is similar or that you might categorize within the same group? Okay, thank you, Erin. So looking at maybe two groups, critical and closed-minded versus open-minded and understanding. Okay, 4 groups. Thank you, Christina. You could also group them, thank you, Krista, by types of learning. Some groups could be listening or winning, understanding. Yep. So many of you are already looking at those labels for those groups. So looking at perhaps goal is understanding might be in the same group. I'm just assuming based on your responses in the chat with open-minded, where maybe determination to be right and defends perspective might also be then in a separate group. So respecting all opinions and beliefs might be something where it goes in open-minded and the goal is understanding, where maybe oppositional might go with listening to find flaws, right? Or defending perspective. So this is actually, and what I'm going to share with you, we're going to talk about this strategy of Socratic seminar, and I'm also going to talk about how I teach it with students. And this is something that I always like to start with. Prior to delving into the strategy and having students engage in Socratic seminar, I have them work with a partner or work with a small group or work independently, whatever works for your students. But I give them a sort like this, and I have them cut the pieces up and go through the process of categorizing. Personally, I like to do it in a collaborative and either with a partner or a small group so that they're discussing ideas. For example, if I'm with Julia, she and I can discuss, well, why is goal is understanding? Why would we put that in the same group as open-minded? What is our thinking there? So, right, so we're already facilitating that discussion, and by having that discussion, we're really prompting students to provide their rationale. Why does this go with this? Why does this idea, how is it similar to, or how is it different from? And then once I give the students some time to categorize and work through this and really think, right? I want to spark their thinking. Then we go into talking about this strategy that we're going to practice within the classroom, known as Socratic seminar or Socratic discussion. So I talk to the students about who is Socrates, and we do a little like preview of who is Socrates. He's a philosopher. He really believed in the power of asking questions and looking at how people learn, that there's a highly social nature to how we learn as human beings in our world. Learning is significantly influenced by interactions with others, be that family members, right? Students and teachers in a classroom, right? We learn, or one way to learn is a very social, collaborative nature. And we're going to practice that in the classroom through Socratic seminar. So prior to talking about the strategy itself, I wanted to ask all of you, what's your prior knowledge about this strategy? Have you used it? Are you familiar with it? Have you read about it? Share in the chat just what do you already know about Socratic seminar as a strategy? There's no wrong answers here. Just like to gauge and prompt you to think about what do you already know? What is your prior knowledge? Okay, thank you, Marianne. We've used it to debate. Okay, thank you. All right, great. Some of you talking about this idea of a debate and some of you talking about this idea of a discussion, right? And they're actually different. They're different approaches to learning. They're different goals, right? So if we go back and look here, and this is something that we clarify for students as we engage in the process, right? A dialogue or a discussion has different goals than a debate. A debate is where we're defending our perspective. A debate demands typically a final answer. A debate can be, not always, but it can be oppositional, right? Where I am determined to share my viewpoint and I'm not really, or I may not be open-minded to alternative viewpoints. A dialogue or discussion has a little bit of a different goal or end in mind, in that it really fosters, the goal is understanding. So if I'm engaging in a Socratic seminar, I want to have an open mind. I want to teach my students, what does it mean to have an open mind? Where I have my beliefs, but I'm also interested in the beliefs of my friends. And I have an open mind that, gosh, my ideas may shift along the way throughout this discussion. So it's a little bit different. They're both collaborative. Obviously, there's similarities, but there's some differences in terms of the goals or objectives. So a Socratic seminar, it's a structured discussion that we can facilitate with our learners in the classroom, regardless of their age. And we'll talk about how we could scaffold or differentiate according to the age of our students based on a text. And I'm using that concept or idea broadly. It could be a picture, right? It could be a quote. It could be an idea. It could be a headline. It could be a story. It could be a poem. So it's based on something that we provide to the students, in which the leader and the students, I will add, ask open-ended questions. So typically when I've used it in the classroom, I start the students off and I plan for 1, 2, or 3 questions. And then really where I want to get is the students are asking each other questions. Then students will listen closely to the comments of their peers in the classroom. And as they're listening, they're thinking, how does this relate to what my beliefs are? Or how does this cause me to think of something in a new way? I'm really encouraging through Socratic Seminar for our students to share their rationale, their beliefs, right? The evidence behind their thinking. I think this because, and we'll talk about this and I'll share with you some strategies. And in a Socratic seminar, students are learning to work and discuss collaboratively, right? They're learning how to question. They're learning how to listen, active listening, right? Being respectful of their peers, even when we have differing perspectives. And we'll talk about that questioning. What's the difference? What type of questions might be appropriate to facilitate dialogue? We don't want a lot of close-ended questions that students can respond with a yes or a no. We want to teach students how to design and craft open-ended questions that facilitate and foster dialogue. These are life skills, right? When we go out in social aspects, right? Go out in the world, we want to be able to carry on a conversation. As adults, we want to teach our students that. How do you ask questions? How do you carry on or foster a conversation with others? And Socratic seminar is one way we could practice that within the classroom. So I wanted to start off by, I'm going to paste this link in the chat. This is a 4-minute video, and I just wanted to give everyone a visual of what this Socratic seminar could look like in the classroom. So everyone take a moment, please. Take 4 minutes to be exact. I think it's a little over 4 minutes. But this is an example just on YouTube of a Socratic seminar being facilitated in a middle school classroom. And they are discussing Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. So I'd just like you to note, as you're watching this, prior to clicking on that link here, what details do you notice about the discussion? If you could identify a rule with this way of learning, what would it be? If you can, after watching this 4-minute video. And then just an evaluative question here based, what is your perspective on this type of learning? Is this something that intrigues you or interests you? I'm curious about your thoughts. So I'd like these prompts to guide your thinking and observation as you watch the video. So let's pause and take 4 minutes to watch this video, and then we'll come back and chat about it.
Would you like me to play it for you, Jenny?
Oh yeah, for sure. I didn't know if that was possible. So I'll stop sharing and that would be great, Julia.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. Hold on one moment, everyone.
So tech savvy, I love it.
The video. Here's the video.
You might have to skip through that front matter, or maybe not. Let's see, on
Oh,
YouTube.
good.
Thank you. Yeah, here we go.
the Socratic seminar was what does he mean by, in a sense, we come to our nation's capital, cash and check, so they can have freedom and rights.
Okay, class, we're going to do a Socratic seminar today on the I Have a Dream speech. You all have your speeches. Remember to be insightful with your questions. It does not matter. Remember, you're not talking to me. You're talking to your classmates. Outside circle, you guys have the fire seat. You want to say something or have a burning question? Get it? Burning question. You all can come on in and kind of change the conversation or ask that question that you have. Okay, so whoever has a question, whatever you're analyzing, go ahead.
We had a little bit of trouble with number 21. I thought it had a lot of metaphors in it, like, this is our hope, this is the faith with which I return to the South. I didn't really get that.
Maybe he's kind of making a metaphor for, like, during the Civil War, like the South, there's slavery, and then, like, maybe in the North there was, like, a lot more people didn't agree with slavery.
And then with this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope.
It's kind of like saying, like, right now they're trapped in a cave of slavery, and they want to get out and go to the stone of hope.
Think about this. What about paragraph 22? So this goes to the hilltop. What does the hill represent? I think you guys have some really good metaphors, but I want you guys to look at paragraph 22. This will be the day of all our God's children will be able to sing with a new meaning. You guys can chime in.
Maybe if you're looking on like a mountaintop, there's a circle, and it represents the ring of the mountain.
Keep going.
I agree with Caitlin because, like, and like Preston, like, because, like, you could hear it, like, it rings, like, it's like echoes. So you can hear it now.
How has the peak? I think that he's trying to say that the whites are on the top and the African Americans are on the low bottom because it's probably like they don't have their real rights to get to let them be able to get to the top where their white are.
I kind of disagree, because, like, I think that the mountain or the peak means, like, activity in where they are giving the speech, and from a ring, they want it to echo out, from the echo being a change in discrimination out into the rest of the country.
He would be saying that because he says he wants, he does.
Come to our nation's capital, cash and check. Paragraph 4.
He used mountains a lot, like, it could be like feudalism where the kings were at the top and then it would rank down by person, or maybe
And
black
like
people,
white people at the
yeah,
top.
and then black people could be at the bottom because the mountain could represent the triangle.
Like that.
So if you yelled at the hilltop, it would echo. So freedom echoes all over hilltops.
Like from
It would
Colorado
spread
to
out.
California to Georgia to
Yeah, so
Tennessee
that
to
would spread
Mississippi
out to the rest of the
country.
country.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, so again, that's just a visual for us. There are different ways to approach and facilitate Socratic seminar, and we're going to talk about those options. But first, I want everyone to think about what details did you notice about the discussion? To just share in the chat, what did you notice immediately? What stood out to you? Yes, the inner and outer circle. Thank you, Christina. And everyone had the opportunity to participate, student participation. Thank you, Kay. Students are referencing the text, right? That's in our standards. We teach that. Support with evidence. So students are referencing the text in order to support their beliefs or perspectives. The teacher is the guide, thank you, Maria, but not the lead, right? So the teacher may interject, right? If you notice, when I'm facilitating Socratic seminar, if I notice there's a pause, I'll say, gosh, let me think about, or have you thought about, and I'll give them something, a leading question, an open-ended question, or something to think about. And then again, kind of step to the side. I am not in the middle of the circle. I'm not even in the circle, right? I want the students making eye contact with each other and listening to, again, to their peers and building off their ideas. Great. All right, so we noticed too, there's an inner and outer circle. That's typically how I facilitate Socratic seminars. This teacher used, what did he call it? A fire seat or a hot seat where there's an empty seat. So a student from the outer circle can come in, if they have something, a burning question or a burning thought to share, they have that option to come in and join the discussion and then go back out. And I'll talk to you about how I differentiate the roles between the inner and the outer circle with my students. But I typically start with an inner and outer circle, and then I have them flip. So I would say, okay, now the outer circle becomes the inner circle and vice versa. I have a colleague of mine who facilitates Socratic seminar on a consistent basis in her classroom, and she has the inner circle stay consistent throughout that period where they're conducting the Socratic seminar. And then the next one, she'll flip where the students then, the outer circle becomes the inner circle. So she does it actually at 2 different lesson plans and topics. All right, so let's look at a rule. What rules do you notice? What do you notice about the structure or the rules with this method? Yep, there's analysis. Thank you, Christina. Referencing the text, right? We encourage that as teachers. Yes, the students have that opportunity. You could pause and say, okay, talk to a partner. Where are you at right now in your understanding? What new wonderings or curiosities or questions do you have? Typically, I've done this with students where I start off and introduce Socratic seminar and the traits of a discussion through the sort, that sort that I shared with you all in the beginning of of our session today. Then I have presented a video. I've used this video, I've used other videos where I want students to see a Socratic seminar in action. If this is a new strategy, a new way of learning for them, and I'll ask them these questions. What details do you notice? Okay, what would you say is a rule for how you're what's happening here in the classroom? And then I ask the students, what are your thoughts on this way of learning? Is this something that intrigues you? Is this something that kind of scares you, right? And that's okay if this is a little bit uncomfortable. We're going to practice it. And hopefully it'll become more comfortable for you the more often we use it in the classrooms. Yes, and Erin, thank you for noting that. That's an important detail we'll discuss in terms of respectful dialogue, right? And we want to really encourage and promote respectful dialogue and respectful responses among our students. So I'm going to chat with you a little bit about the facilitation. Feel free if you have questions or comments. I'm trying to watch the chat as well. So when we're facilitating as teachers, when we're facilitating this type of lesson, we do want to establish clear expectations for our students. And as Erin was saying, that respectful dialogue in the classroom. We want to guide students. I always, as I said, prepare about 2 to 3 open-ended questions I will launch the Socratic seminar with. And my hope is that then students are able to sustain the conversation through the questions that they've prepared. So there is a bit of preparation on the student's behalf prior to just jumping in that inner circle and having the dialogue. We do encourage discussion of ideas and connecting that evidence with the text. We want to try to help our students resist interruption, right? This is challenging. This is challenging for adults in our world, not to jump in, right? When you have an idea come to your head and jump in as someone else is speaking. So it's not a perfect system, and it is not going to look perfect in your classroom with your students. But the goal is to present these opportunities so that our students can practice these skills, practice skills of listening, active listening, practice skills of when to enter a conversation, practice the skills of forming open-ended questions, practice the skill of supporting with evidence, right? So it's a lot of learning visual cues like eye contact. Now I have colleagues that where the students pass a tennis ball, right, to each other in terms of their wanting to speak, or they pass a stick. I really try to foster more of that discussion where I'm listening to Julia and then I jump in. And I noticed over time as I use this structure with students, they become extremely respectful and polite, like, oh, Julia, you go ahead, I'll go after you. So again, we're helping students practice these skills of entering a conversation or a dialogue. All right, preparing for this in the classroom. We need to select what are the students going to talk about, right? You want to talk about something that will intrigue them, that will interest them. What do you know about your students, right? And what would engage them in conversation? What's related to your standards that you could bring in or present to students and foster a Socratic seminar about? So you're going to select a text, and we as teachers are going to prepare a few relevant open-ended questions. Again, with the preparation comes talking to students about what a Socratic seminar is. Feel free to use that sort where it's really a dialogue versus debate. That's the goal with that sort. We're trying to clarify the difference. And then provide time for the students to read or examine whatever your topic is. So whether that be something they do in class, where they're looking at something for a period and jotting down what do they notice, what is of interest to them, what questions do they have. And then lastly, establishing those ideas and setting up the structure and the expectations for a Socratic seminar with our students. During the seminar, all right, so this is what we're doing before to prepare. As teachers, what does it look like during? And that's why I wanted us to watch that video. I would begin by presenting an open-ended question to the students. We really want to guide, not offering like, oh, Julia, that's a great response, or that was a great idea, right? I prompt students to expand. If I notice there's not a lot of students expanding on their ideas, I'll say, scholars, remember, we want to explain our thinking. If you feel a certain way, why? Share that with your friends. And we really want to encourage students to begin to take the lead by asking questions and building on each other's ideas. So I have at times when there's a lull or pause in the conversation, I might say, Johnny, what is one of your questions you want to share with your peers? And have Johnny then practice starting, presenting an open-ended question to facilitate that dialogue with the students. Wait time is important in a Socratic seminar. Silence is okay. It's okay. Students get a little bit squirmy and uncomfortable with wait time. Sometimes adults do too. But utilize wait time and say, that's fine. Just take time to ponder. Let's take time to think, revisit your text or revisit the image. Think about what questions you might want to discuss. And then, of course, as teachers, we're constantly assessing and monitoring, and we may absolutely intervene if the discussion becomes disrespectful or not focused. Right? Sometimes students become a little bit silly and the questions or dialogue can get off track of our topic. So our job, as I see it, to try to remember, or let's refocus ourselves, scholars, on the strategy. And then after, okay, what do we do after a Socratic seminar? I love to ask students, what went well? What do you think went well in the Socratic seminar? What could we as a class improve upon? Or what was how do you feel about this? Is this something you enjoyed? What did you enjoy about it? Or what was challenging, right? We're giving students the opportunity to reflect on the experience rather than just ending and saying, all right, great job, everyone. Let's go to lunch. Let's pause and reflect. What went well? How did you contribute as a learner? And these are questions that you don't need to necessarily answer orally as a class. Maybe the students just reflect on a Post-it note and write to you. I did well. I feel I did well on this. One goal for next time would be. You could integrate an extension activity. Like they could write about it. They could do something after the Socratic seminar. Absolutely. It's an option. And Erin, to answer your question, do I expect all students? I do. I really want all the students to participate and contribute. I encourage that as much as possible. But there are going to be some students that really, are very comfortable and eager and motivated to participate, and others that are a little bit more shy. What I've done over time with that in the past is, let's say, for example, and Julia, I'm using you because I'm looking at your beautiful picture here, but I might notice, if I notice that Julia is not really contributing a lot, or not, I would say, verbally engaging, right? She may be listening. I might pull her aside and prior to starting and saying, Julia, I'd really like you to try to participate at least 2 times. Do you think you could do that? And set a small short-term goal just privately with Julia to see if she's able to then meet that goal and contribute. I want that to be a collaborative goal I set with Julia and myself, or between Julia and myself, but it gives Julia a specific goal, like, okay, I really want to interject or share my question, whatever it might be. And then I always in my classroom have that opportunity where the inner circle becomes the outer and the outer circle becomes the inner. And I'll talk about those different roles in just a moment. All right, so I typically, again, set up inner and outer circle. I challenge the students, in 3 minutes, let's move our desks, or let's sit on the ground and have an inner and outer circle, whatever it might be. If they're sitting on the ground, if they're little, maybe have clipboards, because I do want the students to take notes. I want the inner circle and outer circle to take notes. If my friend's talking and they bring up, or he or she brings up an important point, I might write something down that I want to then share when the dialogue opens back up. Observers also have a specific role, and I want them taking notes about patterns they notice about the conversation. So your role, if you're in the inner circle, you are active listening and you are actively discussing with your friends. You are trying to support your ideas or your thoughts or beliefs with evidence from whatever we may be discussing. Facilitation, I put that as a role for the inner circle students because they're facilitating the discussion. We as the teachers are not facilitating the discussion. We're trying to help the students have a dialogue amongst themselves. Again, will they have lulls and pauses in the conversation? Will you need to jump in and say, okay, now let's think about this? Yes, but that's all part of the scaffolding in helping students attain these objectives. And then note-taking, as I said, that's more purposeful. I see as, my friend said something that I want to make sure was either important to me or made me think about something in a different way. Outer circle, they are typically listening. They are not interjecting. So they're focused listening. They have targeted observation. Sometimes I've seen teachers place students directly behind another student. For example, if I have a student right behind me, they might be looking and observing me and how I contribute, or counting the times I contribute to a conversation. I haven't done that typically. What I do is I want them to note patterns in terms of the entire discussion. What did they notice in terms of the use of open-ended questions? And then they have that opportunity. So before we switch, I'll say, outer circle, what did you notice? And they'll say, oh, they really did a good job referencing the text. Or I noticed a lot of them were able to share their questions. You could even create a type of checklist for those outer circles in terms of specific points you'd like them to observe or take note of. This is something that I have to share with you, and I'll put it in the chat prior to us ending today's session. But these are just sentence stems. There are so many different discussion stems. There are so many different approaches to using discussion stems with Socratic seminars. You might give 2 that you really want students to practice in terms of their beliefs or connecting to an idea. So I show the students these. We actually practice with them prior to the Socratic seminar. So if we're talking maybe about our weekend, right? And then we'll practice these discussion stems with students just briefly, but I want to familiarize them with the discussion stems. And then I actually print these out and the students have them with them during the Socratic seminar so that they could reference them. Again, it's all practice, right? This is a scaffold. These discussion stems are a scaffold. If needed, modify or change them according to your students' needs, right? If I'm facilitating this with eighth grade students or high school students, my discussion stems might look a little bit different than if I'm trying to facilitate a Socratic seminar in 3rd grade. But the point being, it's a tool. It's a resource for helping students engage in respectful dialogue and discussion with their peers. Okay, so we're going to practice, and we're just going to practice as much as we can here with the chat. So this is an image I have used for Socratic seminar over the years, and one that the students really enjoy. This image may or may not be familiar to you, but as you look at it, I'm going to ask everyone to note, what do you notice? So what details do you notice? How does it make you, what does it make you think, or how does it make you feel? Think about the big ideas that could relate to this. You don't need to respond in the chat yet. These are just things I want you to notice. What details are just things I want you to think about personally. What details do you notice? How does it make you feel? Or what does it make you think about? What are some big ideas you might relate or connect to this image? And again, this is something I do with students. I'm modeling it with all of you. But this is something I'll do with my students. And I'll just say in the beginning, okay, what do you notice? Let's get some ideas flowing here. And they'll just share factual observations, right? And the dialogue has not yet started. So now here's the opening question I have used when I'm facilitating Socratic seminar with this. And I'd like us all to try to engage in it. So I'll give you some think time, right? Take a minute or so. Obviously in the classroom, we take longer than a minute. But look at this image. And here's my opening question for you all. What would be a good title for this art? All right, so in the classroom, I present this question and then I give students think time. They are jotting down notes. They are thinking. It is quiet. There is no communication or collaboration at this point. Now, if your students, in order to scaffold this, you could partner them up and say, okay, jot down some notes with your partner about how you would respond to this image. All right, and then I'll just ask all of you, just for time's sake, if you have an idea, go ahead and share it in the chat and share your rationale. What would be a good title for this piece of art? Let's pretend we are all sitting in an inner circle. What would you state and why? Childhood is fleeting. Thank you, Elizabeth. Heart in the wind. Thank you, Maria. Love and loss. I have to tell you, I've done this Socratic seminar with, used this image most recently in 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. And the depth of conversation amongst these scholars is amazing. I mean, some of their comments just gave me chills in terms of, some of them spoke about childhood and, growing up and losing, joys of childhood. And they went really deep with it, and it was great. It was a great source for a starting point for a Socratic seminar. So feel free to use it, right? So we go through, and in the classroom, I'll just carry us on in the conversation of how I've done this, so you could continue sharing your ideas in the chat. So this was my opening question, and the students took some time to discuss in the inner circle. I'm encouraging, what is your idea with rationale? So not just stating the title, right, and then moving on. I think a good title for this would be blank because. And then Julia might say, my idea is similar to yours, Jenny. I thought this because. What I noticed happened with some classes when I was facilitating the Socratic seminar is they went around in a circle. It was almost like I'm sharing, then the person next to me is sharing, where I really want to encourage more of a fluid conversation. So I let it happen because obviously they all want to share their ideas. And I'd say, okay, now let's not try to be so structured in terms of who shares when. And I really want you to listen to your peers and jump in that conversation when you have an idea to connect with or relate to, or you think in a different manner. And this is where you could then encourage students, look at your discussion stems. How can you use a discussion stem to join the conversation? All right, some additional questions, right? Because I mentioned I don't just prepare one. So then I'd stop the conversation. I'd say, okay, the actual title of this piece of art is Girl with Balloon. And the students are always like, what? And I'd say, do you think this is an appropriate title or not? Why? And again, I give them think time. And then I want the Socratic seminar to start back up. So this is where you saw in the video where the teacher had them work with a partner too. Okay, you could talk with the person next to you. How do you prepare? What are your thoughts about this? That's a scaffold, right? Prior to then engaging in the small group dialogue with the inner circle. Do you think this is appropriate, an appropriate title or not, and why? And the students talk about it. Well, it definitely allows for more interpretation and so forth. Here's another question I've given. What message do you think the artist, what is known as Banksy, is trying to share? So I do provide a little bit of input on the art, and then I might provide this follow-up question if needed. So in the classroom, after telling them the title of the artwork, I gave a little bit of information on Banksy and who this artist is, where this art comes from. It's a stencil mural. Banksy is a pseudonym for a graffiti artist, well-known graffiti artist. And so I give them a little bit of information. I just clicked on a link. I talk about the artist. I won't read all of this to you, but this is a known, he utilizes stencil art. He is a street artist. Much of his work is classified as temporary art because he's doing it on the sides of walls in different cities. And we talk about that, and I'll show him some examples. Here's an example of Banksy's work in London. And so I give a little bit of input, and then I had the students flip. Then I had the outer circle become the inner circle and vice versa. And I shared that last question. What message do you think the artist is trying to share? So it's a little bit different. I've moved them from the title to, okay, what's the purpose, right? What message is might the artist be trying to convey? At the end, at the conclusion of the seminar, you could prompt the students directly in terms of, I like to do this just to broaden their thought. What theme connects to the art? What universal concept or theme do you think relates to this piece of art, and why? This could be another Socratic discussion, or this could be an extension activity where the students then write a few sentences on which theme connects to the art in their mind and why. Or I did have one class do this. Think about a time in your life where you felt hope in a time of challenge. How did it make you feel? And then they sketched a symbol. Again, these are options for how to conclude or extend the Socratic seminar. I always try to ask them, what did you enjoy? I want to know, or what do you feel as a class we did well, right? We're building classroom community. What went really well? What could we focus on or change next time? And then this is just something interesting that I always share with the students about this piece of art when it was at an auction, and the moment that the auction sold, or that the art piece sold for millions of dollars, Banksy had created this contraption where it actually shred the piece of art. That's what's happening behind them. So I always show them this, and they are intrigued by it. That's just a side note, but relevant obviously to the piece of art. So tips for leading a Socratic seminar: ask those open-ended questions. The discussion revolves around one question at a time, but as the students become more skilled at it, they're interjecting questions along the way. We want to encourage rather than direct the conversation. I stated that as a teacher. And then you kind of close it. You'll notice there's naturally a pause in the conversation. And when you feel you've exhausted it, right, the students have shared all of their thoughts, then you can close the conversation and ask those reflective questions. Yeah, totally, Aja. I think that would be a great question, right? Show the shredding. It's a 1-minute video on Inside Edition, and then have the students dialogue about that as well. Okay, so the structure with Socratic seminars, we have inner and outer circles. We have guiding open-ended questions. We're encouraging students to reference the text and using those discussion stems as a resource, as a tool, as a scaffold for your students. I have found, regardless of the age, those discussion stems are very valuable. You could just modify and change them according to your student needs. So here are things to try to avoid with students during a Socratic seminar, right? As hard as it is, and interruptions are going to happen, but we want to try to focus on not interrupting. So you might set a goal for your students. If you notice the past 2 Socratic seminars that they've really had a hard time with interruptions, say, let's practice. Like, how are ways that we could practice not interrupting our peers? And set that short-term goal with the students and then use that as a focus goal when they're engaging in their Socratic seminar. So we want to remember it's not disrespectful. It's not a debate, right? Also, it's important that students come prepared. So if they had to read something prior to, maybe it was something they read at home, that every student is prepared to engage and participate in the Socratic seminar. If they're not prepared, we want them to tell us so that we could sit them on the outer circle for that particular Socratic seminar. I went through how to plan, right? We want to select an image, present or prepare open-ended questions to launch or sustain that discussion. Those questions, we want to make sure they are open-ended questions. Closed questions require typically a 1 or 2 word response, right? They're very factual, where open-ended questions prompt analytical or evaluative thinking. Right? This is what we want to help our students practice developing. This is what we want to launch those or sustain those Socratic seminars with. So I talk to my students about the skill of asking an open-ended question, right? How do we ask those open-ended questions? And we want to practice this. We want to practice this throughout the year, but particularly with Socratic seminars. I have them think about their responses to my question, but I also want the students to come up with a question. What would you ask? What are you curious in asking your peers about this image, for example, or this text? Here's a resource, and these are from Dr. Kaplan. They're keywords. I use these all the time with the learners in my classrooms to help facilitate or to help students craft open-ended questions or closed, right? Closed-ended question is factual. What are the types, kinds, attributes of? When you use these concepts or terms in our questions, it typically leads to more open-ended questions, right? When we're asking about purpose or consequences or reasons for, significance or value. Again, this is just a tool or resource to sometimes help us as teachers, but to help students develop those open-ended questions. Okay, I know we're nearing the end of our time, but I wanted to share with you a couple more just examples to get you started. If this is something that might be meaningful for your students. Here's another example of a Socratic seminar. I have this document. I'll drop it in the chat before we conclude today, but I've had them read through this. Side note, something important to note, you want to make sure to jot down. I like to number either the stanzas, the paragraphs, or the lines, because when I'm having students reference the text, they'd say, okay, well, in the first paragraph or in the second line, right? And it's easier for them to specifically reference the text. That's not done on this image, but that would be something you could just add and photocopy. I like to give students the actual photocopy of this text so they're not just reading online. I want them to be able to annotate. So whether they're using an iPad or they're using something on paper, that they're annotating and getting down their thoughts and ideas and questions. So I typically ask the students, okay, what connections can you make prior to coming up with their question, all right? And then I was going to ask all of you, but we won't do it in terms of time, but you could also ask your students, what open-ended question would you like to ask of your peers? I would ask you as teachers, what open-ended question or questions would you use to facilitate or begin a Socratic seminar with your students? So some I've used, it's what's the most important line in this song? Notice this is an evaluative question. That key word of importance or important is there, right? What I jot down as the most important line in the song is going to be different than what my friends jot down. That's an evaluative question. What would you title the song? Could be another opening question. How is the song or lyrics meaningful in today's world, right? So I've prepared some questions. What is the purpose, right? The list goes on and on. I don't give the students input on the song. I'm giving all of you, until after the Socratic seminar, I'm giving all of you input. Their lyrics to Heal the World by Michael Jackson. I often show them the video of it, just again, after, right? To have the students talk about it and to give them a little bit more information about it. Again, you could have them connect to a theme. And this could be a means to prompt discussions to further extend the Socratic dialogue. You know, how does this idea or concept of power relate to the lyrics of this song, or change, or relationships? It's a powerful song. There's powerful lyrics. One other one I've used, and then I'll conclude, is the sneeches. Again, I have this PDF to share with you. I've had the students read through it. Be sure to number the stanzas or number the paragraphs. So we have them read the sneeches. They're all familiar with it. And then I ask this question, okay, well, what does that character show the sneeches by the end of the story? Or another opening question could be, and I'll share these slides with Julia so you have them, motivation. Motivation is a key word in that analytical domain, right? What's the motivation for the continuing tension or conflict with the sneeches or between the sneeches? What can we learn, right? The sky's the limit in terms of these open-ended questions. If you could make the sneeches into a movie, what would you call it and why, right? You can make these fun and interesting for the students, all while practicing these skills of critical thinking, analysis, discussion, asking open-ended questions, building on, right, each other's ideas, joining a conversation, supporting ideas with text. So to connect to your content, and then we'll end, I know we're over on time, but think about what would be a meaningful text, again, using that term broadly with your students. Identify 2 to 3 open-ended questions, and then think about and plan, how will you introduce Socratic seminar with your students? Are you going to do something with the sort, or do you want to show a video? How will you introduce the strategy with students? And then how are you going to begin and conclude the experience? What question will you ask at the end to prompt students to reflect on the experience? So remember, just I leave you or conclude today with closing that really the conversation, the dialogue that results from Socratic method is so valuable, so beneficial. So many skills are embedded into the experience that really promote and offer that opportunity for independent, but also collaborative, right? Reflective, critical thinking. So I know that puts us over the time. I want to drop a couple things just in the chat real quick, and then Julia, I'll send you the slide deck for you to share with everyone, if that's okay. But are there any questions I could answer?
We do have one question from an audience member. They would like to know if every student has to speak during a Socratic seminar.
Oh, yes. And I thought, I don't think, am I able to share something in the chat, Julia, or no?
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay, let's see here. And to answer that question, my expectation for students is that everyone is contributing and engaging in the dialogue. That might look different for some students, right? Some students are going to participate all the time. Others, maybe if they ask one question. So that's where I mentioned maybe if I notice I have a little student who is maybe a little bit hesitant to join the conversation, I might take that student or students aside and set short-term goals, right? What's your short-term goal for engaging in Socratic or participating in Socratic seminar? Do you want to ask one of your questions? Do you want to use a discussion stem? What's your goal in order to encourage and promote that conversation? Huh.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Jenny, for your time and great ideas. Thank you.
My pleasure. I'm sorry, I can't seem to drop these things in the chat. I don't know why. I'm going to try again, though.
Okay, and then we will make sure we get all that information out to everyone.
If not, I'll send it to you. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for your engagement. That was fun.
Thank you all for attending this webinar session featuring Dr. Jennifer Krogh. Your certificate of participation will be emailed to you 1 week after the last day of the event. The next session will begin at 11 using the same link you used to log into this session. You can learn more about our events following us on Facebook, X, or Instagram by searching for @CA Gifted. Thank you so much.